And so, hear this wonderful story from 1 Samuel. And every time you hear me say the word Philistines, everybody here go, "Sss." All right? Philistines. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. They were gathered at Sokoh, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Sokoh and Azekah in Ephes Damim. Saul and all the Israelites gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and formed ranks against the Philistines. Yeah. The Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and the Israelites stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath. Goliath of Gath. That's a great title, isn't it? Whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, scholars believe that's anywhere from 7 feet, round numbers, to 9 feet. When you consider the average age of people during this time in history was probably 4'11", 5 feet, he was, me, Shaquille O'Neal. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, and he had greaves of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, probably around 17 pounds. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. All the servants, when they saw the man, fled from him, and they were very, very much afraid. The Israelites said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. The king will greatly enrich the man who kills him, and he will give him his daughter and make his family free in Israel." David said to the man who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The people answered him in the same way, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." The rest in a few moments. Choir, come. Thank you. Be seated. Wow, wasn't that great? And that was a Kevin Harris arrangement, so thank you, Kevin. So those of you who remember Paul Harvey, now for the rest of the story. All right. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight the Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it." Don't tell Kenny that, okay? Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of the Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag, in the pouch, his sling in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. I think that's kind of odd, don't you? He's a ruddy little guy, but he is handsome. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to that Philistine, "You come to me with your sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it into our hand." It's a sweet little boy, isn't it? When the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly to the battle line to meet the Philistine. But David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck that Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over that Philistine. He grasped his own sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistine saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The troops of Israel and Judah rose up with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sharaim as far as Gath and Ekron. The Israelites came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. There you go. Isn't that a sweet story? Goliath was huge. His armor by itself and his weapons weighed more than the people he was coming up against. And he came out in front of all this army, and he challenged one man to fight him. One man. If he beats me, we'll be your servants. But if I beat him, you'll be our servants. That's pretty easy for a guy who's standing probably 3 to 4 feet taller than anybody else in the field to say, right? And everyone was afraid, except for one shepherd boy named David. And even as a boy, he was wise and sly and ambitious. What do you get if you kill the Philistine champion? You guys don't have to sis anymore. What do you get if we kill Goliath? The king's going to give you like lots of money, one of his daughters. Ah, okay. I may be only 12 or 13, but yeah, I could do that. And so David goes and volunteers, and the king looks at David because he's so small and he's such a boy, and Goliath had been a warrior since his youth. Said, "You can't go up against that giant. You're just a ruddy little boy, but you're handsome." And David says, "I'm more than just good looks, O king. I've been a shepherd, and I've gone up against lions, and I've gone up against bears. Oh my. And I have defeated them, and I have killed them with my own bare hands. Let me at him, let me at him, let me at him. Put him up, put him up, put him up." So Saul said, "Well, okay." And Saul put his armor on David, and David couldn't move around. So David took all the armor off. Now notice, this is a key part in this story. It's one of those little things that you might in your own mind says, well, that makes sense. He was a small guy, the armor was too heavy. But no, David went up against Goliath as vulnerable as a person could be. He had no armor, he had no shield, he had no sword, he had no spear. What did he have? He had his wits, his athletic ability, and his sheer determination that he was going to defeat the giant. He was vulnerable as a person could be in the line of battle. Hold on to that. When David came up to the giant with his shepherd's staff, his stone, and his slingshot, Goliath looked down at him and said, "What, are you wanting me to fetch your stick like a dog?" Now, dogs were not domestic animals in this time in history. To be called a dog was not a good thing. No one had cute little puppies. So Goliath was insulting David, and when David drew up to the battle line, David started running toward Goliath. Now, the strategy was beautiful because, first of all, it caught Goliath by surprise. David was small and fast. So Goliath, before he could even realign himself and get a big javelin to throw it at David, David was already coming to him. It's hard to hit a target that's coming to you like that very quickly. And David had a stone in a sling, and whew, stone hit him right between the eyes. He fell face down, and young little David grabbed his sword and cut off his head, kept his head, holding it around a little bit, said, "Hey, I've had a good day. I'm going to be wealthy, I'm going to marry the king's daughter, and life is going to be good." David faced Goliath and defeated him. Everybody in the story but David and Goliath had something, and it was huge. What did everybody in the story have that David and Goliath did not have? What? Fear. Everybody. The army was afraid. Saul was afraid. Everybody was afraid. And in order for David to beat Goliath, David had to be fearless. For he said that God does not win God's battles with a sword and with a spear, but the battle is already in God's hands. And as a young man, that's what David believed. Now let's take a look at Arthur Ashe. And we have a bio for him, so watch this, and then we'll continue the rest of the story in a moment. First one came at age 6 when his mother died. That's very traumatic, not only for anybody, but for a small child. But that event and that trauma did not stop him from excelling in his life And thankfully for him, he had a father who made him toe the line and created a great deal of structure, but also enabled his tennis talents and made sure he had opportunities to practice and to be coached and to play. As he was growing up, he had to deal with racism, not only in South Africa, but it was rampant in the United States. And it had to be scary at times and unnerving at times to be the only African American among all these white people playing this sport. But he faced that Goliath, and he did it with grace and with dignity. Then, when he saw the racism, especially in South Africa, he saw that Goliath, and he did not become angry and bitter. He became an activist. Every Goliath he ever met in his life, he used his wits and his skills and his grace and his charms to overcome and defeat it. The last 14 years of his life, he had a lot of bad health. He had a heart attack. That's what caused him to have to quit tennis. After that heart attack, he had a second heart surgery, a bypass, and during that surgery, through the blood transfusion, that he contracted HIV. But through all the illnesses that he had, all those Goliaths that he faced, he still faced them head on and never became embittered by it, but rather embraced it and overcame. When he contracted HIV and he announced it to the world, remember, this was, 20 years ago. This was not a time when everybody says, hey, I got an HIV. Oh, well, we're so sorry. No, this is when people with pitchforks and torches were ready to burn your house down and run you out of town because people were still very much afraid of this disease. And when he faced this Goliath, he did not let it define him. He did not let it tear him down, but rather he looked at it straight away, and he became an activist for HIV and for AIDS research. He was able to raise, through his leadership during this short period of time, $5 million for AIDS research. He died at age 49 from his disease, but throughout his life, Arthur Ashe faced one Goliath after another. So Arthur Ashe and David had something in common. And what is that? No fear. Now, does that mean we don't get scared, or we're uncomfortable, or we might be hesitant at times? That's a part of being human. But it's fear that keeps us from defeating the Goliaths that we face in our lives. I don't know what your Goliath is today. I don't know what it is. But you're not going to ever overcome your Goliath if you continue to be afraid of it, if you continue to deny it, if you continue to try to hide from it, if you keep looking for somebody else to put on some armor and fight it for you. What is your Goliath? Is it addiction? Is it mental illness? Is it estrangement? Is it low self-worth and self-esteem? What is your Goliath? Is it fear of being unemployed? What is your Goliath? Is it being involved in a transition in your life and relationships changing and you're afraid of what's going to... What is your Goliath? David said, God does not win God's battles with the spear and the sword, but God knows God has the battle in God's hands already. And that is the confidence that we can use to help us to overcome our Goliaths. In your own mind, don't be thinking about, oh my God, what if this doesn't work out? Oh, what if I can't overcome? Oh my God, what is going to happen to me? Already assume that the God of the universe, who created you in God's image, in David's image, in Arthur Ashe's image, that God already has given you the resources to overcome anything that comes your way. Assume that, and then move forward based on that assumption. Arthur Ashe once said, true heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to suppress all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost. He also said, one important key to success is self-confidence. What is your Goliath? I promise you, there is nothing in this world that you cannot face, look square in the eye, and not overcome. Nothing in this world. Nothing. And I believe that's why we face the challenges that we face, so that we can truly experience and know intimately. The Greek word is gnosko. Know through intimate knowledge that when we face the challenges and our Goliaths and we see ourselves overcoming them because we tap into this incredible reserve of strength and let go of fear, that we know we can overcome anything. When I was growing up in church, and religions around the world have taught for millennia now, that the great human dilemma is our sin and our ugliness and not choosing the right paths and rebelling against God. But I'm telling you this, I believe with all of my heart and soul at this stage in my life, the greatest sin we commit is being afraid. And fear not, don't be afraid, fear not, don't be afraid is all through the Bible. Do not let your fear become the Goliath that keeps you from being and overcoming what God has put in your path. I'm kind of being preachy right now, aren't I? Kind of telling you what to do. So let me rephrase that. It's like, you know, our wives don't nag us, they assertively encourage us, right? So let me assertively encourage you. Whenever we're facing Goliaths, it's usually at our most vulnerable time. Don't be afraid of your vulnerability, because it's in that nakedness, so to speak, that you discover what you have and who you are. You are a child of God. You are created in the spirit and the image of God. You are created by the same God who created David, by the same God who created Moses, by the same God who created Jesus, by the same God who created Mother Teresa, by the same God who created Maya Angelou, by the same God who created Arthur Ashe. You are created by that same God, and you have that same image in you. So live in that reality and take on the Goliaths with full confidence that the battle is already in your hand. Thus ends the lesson. Let us pray.